Hey y'all, welcome back to Bowls with the Bard. My name is Cakes, I am your host. On today's episode of Stoned Shakespeare, I'm gonna rant a little bit about producing Shakespeare in 2019. But before I do that, I'm gonna smoke some weed. So, last week, I went and saw a couple of Shakespeare plays that I had never seen before. And I went in so excited because I hadn't seen the plays before, and I really enjoyed reading the plays when I read them. I'm not gonna say what they are. I don't wanna like trash the theater that produced them because I usually really like their work, but I was not impressed with this production. And there were a lot of reasons for that I think highlight the questions and the things that we should be considering when we produce Shakespeare in 2019. Shakespeare has been around now for almost 400 years, and we can't just be producing the same Shakespeare over and over and over again. We need to start thinking outside of the box. So a few of the points that I want to make here are, one, when we are casting Shakespeare, we cannot keep casting just white men. It's boring, A, and B, most of the time you cast those boring white men as the leads, and then you cast interesting women of color, people of color, just women in general in the smaller roles, and the audience leaves asking why those people in the smaller roles weren't in larger roles. But beyond that, we also need to be thinking about the stories that we're telling right now. So we have seen white male Shakespeare over and over and over again. And I think we are reaching a point in 2019 where we're really starting to be interested in hearing the stories of more marginalized people. And so I am interested in seeing an all-female Julius Caesar, no matter what that production is going to say. I'm interested in seeing it because it says something different than what an all-male Julius Caesar would be saying. I do want to see a production of Othello with all people of color, to see how they make Othello an other in some other way, shape, or form. I want to see these stories told in a different way based on the people who are in the story telling the story. And even though I love Shakespeare, I've reached a point that when I see Shakespeare that is missing these other people's voices, I kind of tune out to it because I'm tired of hearing the story, and I've read it, so I've heard the story before. I don't need it if these other voices aren't being represented. So I think that's the number one most important thing to consider when producing Shakespeare in 2019. Another small, probably less important and less poignant detail, but you know, cut Shakespeare in 2019. We don't need to be doing 2.5 to 3 hour Shakespeare plays. Unfortunately, these days, unless something is absolutely genius, people just don't have the attention span to pay attention to 3 hours or 2.5 hours of Shakespeare. And I say that as somebody who loves Shakespeare. Again, I do, but most of the time, if you make me sit through 3 hours of it, I'm done by the end of it. So the shorter, the better. If you can tell the story and cut out all the bullshit that doesn't need to be there, then do it. Now, that being said, something that the production that I went to see last weekend did that really made me upset was that when they made the small amount of cuts that they did make, they seemed to decide to cut out all of the scenes that were meant for women. Don't do that. As I said before, other voices, very important. So if Shakespeare wrote in other voices and you barely cast women as men, you should probably keep the few female voices in. Another really important question to be asking yourself while you're producing Shakespeare is, why am I producing this Shakespeare play now? And the lovely thing about this is that the answer can simply be, I want to make people laugh right now. And that's wonderful. Like, if that's the answer, then make people laugh. But on the flip side of things, if you're telling a political story, definitely consider what that political story is saying and what time period you're living in and what is relevant in the news, and ask yourself if that's the story that you want to be telling in the area that you're in the country that you're in the climate that you're in right now. It's really important to not just be producing Shakespeare because you say, I want to produce this play right now because I love it. I unfortunately don't think that's enough. While doing Shakespeare in 2019, there are kind of two routes that you can take. You can either perform Shakespeare that is set in Shakespeare's time, and if that's something that you're going to do, great, but definitely make sure that you know what the audience is supposed to get out of your version of the story. Don't let it just be Shakespeare set in Shakespeare's time. I had a great director who helped me in Othello by telling our whole cast that he really wanted us to all focus on the moments of love in that play. So it wasn't just about doing Othello set in Othello's time, it was about telling the story of these people who had a lot of love within them but couldn't quite communicate it in the right way. On the flip side of things, you can do Shakespeare with a concept. That can be really fun too, but don't just throw a concept on Shakespeare. You really have to consider, does this concept, time period, costume idea, whatever it is, really work with the story that's being told in this play? Really go back to the text. That's really important, because you end up with just silly Shakespeare and bad Shakespeare if you don't, and then that turns people off of Shakespeare, and we don't want that. So yeah, those are just some of my thoughts surrounding producing Shakespeare in 2019. If you have any strong opinions about producing Shakespeare in 2019, or acting in Shakespeare, or directing Shakespeare, or whatever it is, please sound off in the comments below. I would love to hear that and chat with you guys. If you enjoyed today's episode and you would like to see more content like it, please like us on Facebook at Bulls with the Bard, subscribe to us on YouTube and WeedTube at Bulls with the Bard, and like us on Instagram at Stone Shakespeare. Bye y'all!
Lay me where sad true lover never find my grave to weep there.